Any questions?
Thank you. A couple of things. Number one, when you're doing the conceptual drawings here, I noticed that First Street has not really been emphasized that much, and yet it is a very narrow street, as well as the fact that it has two-way traffic, as well as truck traffic that comes from the post office, and a bridge, which I understand is under the control of MnDOT. Have you thought about how you're going to interact River World with the First Street, as well as that turn as it goes into Fifth, as well as addressing some of the vehicular issues that will arise with so much traffic being in the area?
Well, it's we've discussed, and I would have to say it would be our hope that we could eliminate the truck traffic that's on First and have it be much more of a quiet street, in as much as there'll be more pedestrian traffic using the sidewalk next to it. We did think that maybe this would be a place that some parking is being lost in where the gatehouse is being put, that maybe this would be a place for drop-off or handicap parking. The river that would be about as close as you could get with a vehicle. We also discussed the possibility of, even if parking were eliminated from one side of the street, maybe the street is actually narrowed a little bit more to even, make it a 15-mile-an-hour street. These are just some ideas the design team has kicked around. It's a city street. I think as part of all of this, there need to be a traffic study. But I think that, those are ideas that make sense to us, at least, given the transformation that we all think should happen to the area.
Have you given any consideration to the use of pervious pavement in this area to buffer the runoff to the river?
We haven't discussed that, but I think it's a terrific idea, and those materials are used more and more. I think particularly the pedestrian areas, it could be very appropriate for that. It might be that the paved area, this actual road surface, might not lend itself to it, but we've talked a lot about how this should be a very sustainable and future-oriented redevelopment. This was a very innovative place in its history. This was cutting-edge technology through a whole milling district, and that legacy should live in energy efficiency and all the best sustainable strategies.
The elimination of curbs and gutters and the use of rain gardens, I think, would be an interesting asset to the place also.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We didn't choreograph this in advance.
I only can use one at a time. Couple questions about where is the parking going to go, since we've kind of lost that little bit that they had. And number two, you keep hearing emphasis on food. I'm thinking about this building here. The food stand is up in the corner looking off the street. Why not do a development here that would look out at the river too for food as well? And number three, you use sea salt for your good comparison. There are not 1,000 people living, within a couple hundred feet of that building as there would be for the old Fugia. And finally, how much bigger would the Fugia be in height and dimensions? Did you get into that?
Let's see. I'll talk about parking and then hand it over to Danny. Had a lot of discussion about parking. And first of all, I think parking is a necessary part of our culture, but this is the equivalent of, I can't think of a more historic or significant site. To have a parking lot in the middle of it is just not appropriate. There is parking, across the street. There's a ramp. There's a parking ramp by McPhail. The parcel A will have parking underneath it when that is developed, and there's, I think, good reason to think that part of that can or should be public. There would remain street parking up in both directions on River Road. And if you look, kind of in the downtown area at the distance from parking to various events that, people who live and work downtown are used to negotiating, these distances to walk a small block are not, untypical of those kinds of distances.
I'll first just add on parking. Mike.
All right. I'm a loud person, but I can now speak more quietly. On parking, as Bruce pointed out this morning, there are 1.4 million people that use the downtown Riverfront every year. There are about 40 parking spots on the site. It's not a tremendous asset, and as Tom said, sort of isn't generally the right use. So we basically feel as though those 40 cars could go elsewhere. Can park elsewhere. There should be rooms for drop-off of family members and so on and so forth, but that parking isn't the best use for the site. Moreover, just sort of as an economic development consultant, I'd say if you have a destination on a riverfront like this, and you're trying to increase activity in downtown, that making people, frankly, forcing people to park a few blocks away and then walk here is a better strategy from an economic development perspective. Switching to food, would you mind just clarifying your question real quick?
Well,
Because there are a few things in
there's
there.
such an emphasis on the Fujiya, and comparing it to sea salt isn't quite fair, because sea salt stands alone, no apartment or citizens living right next to it. I never heard anything about the citizen concern for River West, and even the Carlisle and the other buildings where they have several thousand people living right now. So when you bring food in, you bring in garbage, trucks, smoke, smell, possibly you have alcohol. I mean, there are a lot of other concerns that you're now looking at, which I can see can bring you a couple 100,000, but I'm also considering why it has to be only at that site, when we already have possibilities here or down by the river.
I think that those are definitely valid concerns about food at the Fujiya site. I'd say, though, that, and they should be considered moving forward. The Fujiya site has historically been a restaurant site, and I think that while the things like noise and trucks and deliveries should all be considered in any plan moving forward, that generally that site, one of the challenges in particular of that site is the fact that you have to cross the road. Yeah, and it winds up being a connection to downtown, and so there have to be uses up there that wind up attracting people across the road in order to use that portion of the site in terms of a park, if it's going to be a regional park destination. In terms of other sites, I believe there should be food on other sites. In fact, sort of I've been advocating for a long time. I think that the Midas platform, this platform down here, is a fantastic food site, even as it is, and whether it's a temporary seasonal structure or whether it's a permanent structure, who knows? I think that those are plans that will come down the line, but that there should be certainly multiple venues for food here, or could be.
She asked about height as well.
Right. That's not me.
Well, the diagram for the building shows a building that is probably about the same size as Fujiya. I mean, there's a lot of variables as to just what the market would support, but we're looking at a building that's maybe 3,000 square feet in footprint, which is pretty small, and that's modeled after the sea salt kind of building. If it were to be like I think Brenda down here is maybe about 4,000 square feet. So a small sit-down restaurant, doesn't get much bigger. I would guess that maybe Alma across the river is also something like 4,000 square feet. So, and restaurants like that would not be much bigger than the current building. In terms of height, it really doesn't need to be much taller than it is, if at all. But there's a lot more that would go into the final dimensions of it. But just in rough terms, I think if you look at the existing building and say, yeah, it's going to be about that bulk.
Hi, my question is about that park board headquarters that you're talking about proposing for that site. And I'd be interested in finding out what other uses you have slated for that building. I know we've talked about restaurant, we've talked about park board headquarters, we've talked about airing up for bicycles. I'm wondering if any thought has been given to an urban ecology center. The idea of really putting Minneapolis on the map in terms of the renewable energy, teaching people an opportunity to not only talk about the culture and the history of the site, but also what the future of Minneapolis as a sustainable city could and should be. To add on to the idea of the air for bicycles, as an avid cyclist, I love having places to fill up my tires, so thank you for that. But I would also like a place to potentially rent skis, or is there an opportunity for other kinds of like equipment rental for people to not only use this site right here, but to branch out further down either side of the West River Parkway, and really kind of make it a destination for coming and staying and for leaving and coming back, and I don't know if you could just address that a little bit.
Totally agree. Skis in particular. Put cross-country skiing there. I love it. There are lots of different uses that we could wind up looking at there. And I think that how the building gets developed, what exact size it is, where things are in relation to West River Road versus First Street, should all be considered as the plan comes forward. But we have, an ecology center has been talked about throughout. We had a long conversation about it this morning in another meeting about this. We've been thinking throughout about how do you have interpretation and have historical interpretation of the water and the ecology, what have you. They're all, I think, great opportunities, and those are the suggestions that would be helpful as we refine this moving forward. Ultimately, there's got to be a business plan for what happens in that building and who the tenants are going to be and who would run the ecology center. I think that it's the type of place, though, that, again, we've got a site, and if somebody said, I want to run an ecology center, or if the park board or someone said, I would like to establish an interpretive center here and create a business plan around that, all for it. I think that the whole idea of a zone dedicated or a zone that includes a series of park pavilions would be to house those types of services that wind up adding to the experience of the park. So great suggestions, and we'll definitely take them forward.
We've talked about using hydrothermal for the heating and cooling of the building. Instead of drilling wells like you do with the geothermal, using just maybe a 2-inch pipe that would come from the river, take that water, draw the heat out of it. Also, since it was the waterworks building, it'd be natural to interpret clean water and the whole state of water health would be such a natural. Water power, again with the canal. So there's some stories that just seem like they want to be told. We also talked about linkages to the university's hydrology lab, and their civil engineering, biology, and I can't forget what the third partner is over there, but they're doing some of the kinds of things that you're suggesting too. And I think by coordinating with them, that maybe not every story would have to be here, but it could be as well. As Danny says, there's just a lot more thinking about exactly what would go into the building, and it might, over the life of the building, the uses might change as well somewhat.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Just for my reference, I just wanted you would point out a couple of things. One is, where is the Corps of Engineers lock and dam parking lot? How many spaces are in that? If that use were to be discontinued, there's been discussion about lock and dam being decommissioned or used as a exotic species barrier. Just wondering how big the parking lot is and if that might be available. And then could you point out where the past or future locations of a crown hydro plant would be on your design if it were to go forward?
Well, this is the parking lot. I think it just looking at it, I don't know this for a fact, it looks like it might hold 40 cars. I think it's just kind of first come, first serve now, but you know, if it was 2-hour parking, it would not be commuters then, or you know, it could serve the visitor who wants to hike for a couple hours. I don't know precisely where Crown Hydro has last decided to, you know, make a proposal, but you know, this is the Crown Mill, and I think it was in the vicinity of the parking lot.
Yeah,
Oh.
the parking lot has about 39 spaces. I think 7 of them are for the Corps of Engineers for visitor parking. The rest are contract parking owned by the park board. So if you want to park downtown and not pay as much and walk a little further, we have contract parking there. And then if, and I put this as a big giant if, because I think they're about one step from having their license pulled. If Crown Hydro were to love pave, they would be where the gatehouse is. A little
Thank
bit
you.
north of that.
One of my questions is to spending the whole day there and being there and having visitors come there. Probably the most unpleasant thing about being in Millrose Park right now is the smell, and just like that natural river smells. Any thought into people spending the whole day there and splashing and being in the water when it's kind of gross?
I guess I would say.
The smell, actually the first time that the smell has come up, I think, but that's really interesting to think about. I don't think that we'd be thinking much about splashing in that water necessarily, but certainly the first thing that popped to my mind was if you have the smell, and we're talking about gardens, that could be a really interesting play there, that you could wind up having, you know, use planting, which has been done in many other places, use planting as a way to mask the smell or even develop it into a really interesting new smell.
It seems to me the Achilles heel right now is the River Road piercing through the site. I drive there quite often, and especially during rush hour, there is a lot of traffic, and you're really taking your life in your hands when you cross any of those intersections. And I'm just kind of wondering if you have a feel for how that kind of parking arrangement, or that drive arrangement that you showed us from Europe, does the city have any interest in something like that? And could that sort of help? Because right now, it's really, rush hour, it's really a tough place to be.
All I know is that conversations are going to be had with the city about this. It's something that we feel very strongly about. Certainly, if the Fuji-Ya site, if the Fuji-Ya portion is going to be part of that, that's sort of imperative for the success there. But, so one of the things that has been recurring is that West River Road is often used as a commuter route, and that's not what it's intended to be, and shouldn't be. And so I think that the shared street concept is mostly about making it feel a little bit more like a park, but frankly, about traffic calming. And there are a number of strategies to use for traffic calming. You can use traffic calming through design, or as I was talking about earlier, there are ways in which, you know, this might be a crosswalk that is a hump that you can't go over more than 5 miles per hour, for example. But those are all the types of things that we'd want to explore. Clearly, having the shared street as a separate concept here it's just been elevated to that level. It's clearly the most important thing in terms of infrastructure that's going to be necessary to make whatever happens work.
Just to add on Danny's comment to that, one of the advantages that we have as the park board is that we own that, the park board owns that parkway, and we have more flexibility, and we frankly give ourselves more flexibility in the way we design streets than would be the case if it were a city of Minneapolis street. So I think if there's ever an opportunity for us to explore ideas like the Plaza Street, like was being suggested by Tom in this project, the park board might be the logical entity to put that out there first.
I like that.
Have you, coming down the left corner a little bit further, the space that adjoins this building, which is now not being used, but I've heard mumblings about coffee shops and lattes and all kinds of things. Would you draw that use district down just a little bit further so it comes to the end of this building? Because there is a space down here that could be used for this kind of thing.
John, I think that's the office building for the mill that you're referring to, and I know that people at the museum here have talked variously about those ideas, and so I think it's still alive as an idea, and really wouldn't be any reason not to do it. It's been restored, basically as a space that can function, and it's not used for anything. Yes, yeah, Mill City Museum. It's part of Mill City Museum.
How long do you think this process is going to take? The implementation, the building of it. I mean, the design period, you already probably decided to be about a year. But once you get approval from the city and all, the park board.
Well, it's impossible to say always how long something like this will take, a vision like this. But
I was under the impression you had money.
Yep, that's what I'll talk about. Is that what we do know is that we have in the Park Board's capital improvement plan over the next 5 years, we have about $20 million between the central riverfront, which is essentially the area that we're looking at on both sides of the river, and then in addition to the above the falls area. So that's the area from the Plymouth Avenue Bridge northward.
Well, you're not rivaling the two money, or isn't there just one money segmented for central? And
there is.
The other money is...
The way we have it earmarked in our capital improvement plan right now is about $7 or $8 million toward the central riverfront, and the remainder toward the above the falls area. So, that's the money that we have to work with as far as, and in some ways this is really seed money, to try and leverage those dollars for private investment, for grants, for other funders that are out there. And we're successfully doing that in both areas, both the above the falls area and the central riverfront. So that would be the intent to do that. But we do have dollars to put toward the central riverfront.
So with something concrete in a decade?
Absolutely. Before that, you'll see concrete changes in the central riverfront, and they've been going on throughout the last decade as well. But concrete changes within the next couple of years. We'll be making improvements within the central riverfront. A lot of the more significant, I think, changes and investments will happen from 2 years to 5 years from now.
Is there a sense of priority in starting with building that generates revenue so that you will have that money to pour back into the project?
The type of money that I think we're talking about in terms of revenue is not, or generally as we look at it, is not the type of money that you use to finance capital improvements. Instead, it's part of an operating source. What I will say is that I believe that those revenue generators, but let's leave aside the revenue generators, the uses, the services, the ability to have food and toilets and provide those services that will allow people to stay the day are, we believe, imperative for a first phase. So however this gets phased, whether it's built all at once or whether there's an initial phase, we've got to be thinking about the diversity of uses and the ability to provide those services so that it has its maximum impact. I think that any first phase should certainly be catalytic for the rest of it.
This is great seeing this world-class riverfront and connection to downtown. You've created at least two new connections at 3rd and then at 5th Avenue. One of the other things that people are trying to do in the region is have more active use of the river itself, creating a river trail. And Senator Klobuchar has a bill now to close the locks potentially if need be as an invasive species barrier. Can you talk talk a little bit about how people might get around this area as a portage? There was potentially historic portage in this area as well. Maybe you could talk a little bit about use of the river, and then how do we keep that vibrant use of the river itself as well as the riverbank?
Well, there was some discussion in an earlier meeting today about portage, and we haven't plotted out a route, but there would be, I think, good potential on either side of the river to take a canoe up and around. And Cordelia, I think when you're saying use of the river, you mean getting more on the river with, yeah. Well, you know, we have a place here which we've kind of designated as a boat landing, and when the lock and dam cease to be used, or if they cease to be used, this would be a nice quiet backwater. Right now, I believe that the intake for filling the lock is over here someplace, and so it's not a safe place until that happens. But it's a sort of a natural, because it's away from the turbulence of the river. And then I think you know, this lower area down here doesn't get much use, but it could get more use as a place for people to enjoy actually walking in the water.
Just to take that one step further, we have an operation that runs kayaking tours on the river, and one of the great aspects to our area is that we get to connect Minneapolis with St. Paul. And this portage issue, I see clearly, Tom, a portage access where you're talking about to the lower pond, and then we would need another access at the lower lock to get around the lower lock. That would be acceptable. On the other hand, I hope we think long and hard about whether or not closing the locks is the right idea. There are locks all over the United States, and it's part of our country's heritage to be able to move through rivers. And if we do lose the locks, I certainly hope we do think long and hard about portaging, because it's what makes our business really terrific, to be able to get down into the lower gorge and back up into the city and be able to go from Minneapolis to St. Paul. You can't do that in many places. So I encourage you to think long and hard about that portage.
Not too many years ago, there was talk of a whitewater rafting facility. Is that still on the plans, or is that gone?
Maybe there's someone else here who knows more current information.
I don't know if I know the most current information, but I know that the whitewater facility that you're talking about was for the east side of the river, Hennepin Island side of the river. And so that's outside of the study area that the design team was looking at for this particular effort. I think as we talk about the Central Riverfront Master Plan revision, the whitewater facility will be in that conversation, definitely, just as issues of portage will. I'm glad Bob pointed out that there are two pools, which also gets us a little bit outside the scale of this study. So it does figure in the big picture, but not technically in the study.
Could you explain about the Spirit Island? I couldn't quite understand if you're going to have some lights to duplicate the island, or what was that?
Yeah. Nick, do you want to take us back? Well, we'll get the image up, but as part of the upper river competition, there was a proposal made by that design team to put lights under the river that would outline the profile of where Spirit Island was. And it's not a terribly big image here, so I'm not sure you could see it, but that's an indication of light coming through the water where the island was, and that it would be made also more accessible by the riprap jetty that goes out towards it being made accessible to the public.
It's nice that you acknowledge the past presence of the island. Why not reconstruct the island? God knows the Corps left enough rock in the river. You can reconstruct. It's not a big island. It never was.
Well, if barge traffic is removed from the river, that would be an option.
Thanks.
I just wanted to add that the River First vision, the images of a lit area of the water, but if you read the text in the document, it really suggests that the images, the idea is a catalyst to further discussion with the Native American communities especially, but the larger community also, about various ways to remember the islands that were in the river, the islands and places that have cultural significance dating well before European settlement and the mills, etc. So it's the lighting of the water is one way to interpret that, but it's also a starting point for a conversation about how to use that space or how to remember those spaces.
Or to reconstruct the island.
That could be part of the conversation, yes indeed.
I heard mentioned earlier the Crown Hydro project. Is that still viable, and what kind of an impact would it have to do on this particular right here?
Commissioner Walensky didn't have a microphone, so if you permit me, I'll speak, or I'll reiterate what you said. She said that it's a very big if, whether that will go forward or not. She said that they were this close to getting their license pulled, I guess, as a result of inaction on that license. Is that fair to say? So I don't know if that addresses the question. I'm sorry, I didn't see where the question came from. Does that address the specific question about Crown Hydro?
Is that still a viable part of this riverfront development? And if so, how does it will impact what we have here the same day?
I guess technically it's still viable in that their license, to my knowledge, has not been revoked yet by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC. It doesn't have a place specifically in this design concept. It's not located in this design concept. And I guess maybe that's as complete an answer as I can give.
Or one might say no.
Thank you, Scott. Commissioner Freeland has helped us with a simple answer. Okay, 1 or 2 minutes. We'll take more questions, and then we have plenty of boards, and we can have one-on-one with the posted comments.
A number of marathons come from the south towards the north and turn on the bridge. And the way I'm looking at it, it's a sharp corner at the top there. But there will be some consideration to make more of a gentle curve from the border of the intersection of Parkway onto the bridge. Right now, there's a lot of traffic going from Portland onto the bridge, as short as a route, even across the grass as possible. And from what I see there, I don't see a gradual entrance from the Portland intersection to the bridge.
I'm sorry to keep taking the mic back from you, Tom, but I think that's a really good, important question, not just for the marathons and for the walks. The design team has been encouraged at every step of the way to think about the various events that occur here, large and small. I think that's one of the things driving the notion of the shared street, that it's not a street anymore, it's really a plaza. Currently it doesn't function very well as a commuter route or as a plaza for events when it's closed down. This puts primacy on it as a plaza for events. And one of those events could be the marathon. As to your question of the route, I think there's plenty of room for adjustment in the geometry of this design, but I think also that events can reflect the shape of the public spaces that they take. And I think we could find a route through a space like this, especially since so much of the shared street would be shut down for such an event. So I think large events like that are very important, and I just want to let everybody know that we have been encouraging the design team to think of those events. Should we maybe take 1 or 2 more questions?
Since this is so historical, have you given that any consideration for putting more block streets, in other words, like the cobblestone streets, like digging up some of the asphalt and some of the side streets, just to kind of bring the city more into the park?
Yeah, we did talk a lot about wood planks. No, I think that kind of material, you know, would be really the kind of thing we're looking at, because traditional cobblestones or brick can have a very long lifetime. They also can absorb moisture. They're historically accurate. So we didn't get into the particulars of material or do any research in exactly what was here, but I think there's a lot of reasons to think that that would be a prime candidate. And also, you know, if this is primarily a public plaza in its, you know, character, you don't want to have it be concrete or asphalt. It wants to be paving material.
I need to ask another question. I'm curious about Nicollet Island, which is already a park facility with, you know, with a pavilion and that space there. Will there be any way in the future to connect those two sections or areas of the river?
To connect the Nicollet Island Pavilion with this site? Or?
Right, like a skyway bridge for pedestrians only.
Oh, well, I guess I feel pretty confident in saying probably not, but connecting them using, I mean, not with a dedicated skyway bridge, but using the existing connections, the Stone Arch and Third Central, for definitely, those are the connections we need, and the Henniker Bridge to Nicollet Island. At the first public meeting, Bruce Chamberlain pointed out that this site doesn't have to do everything, that there are a whole suite of parks in the central riverfront, and so the pavilion on Nicollet Island can hold, I don't know, 500-600 people. Is that about right? And so a site like this, for example, at the King Midas platform, maybe you could have a reception for 100 people. Maybe in the future, Tom referenced the post office at the upper right, that would have space for 1,500 people. So,
What I'm saying is we already have a facility and some sites that seem to be underutilized, and it looks like we're going down there. So now it seems like we're shifting places here where there is a place to pick up some traffic, people, and historical markers as well.
okay, I think I understand the question now. This is a good closing question, actually, because again, in the context of the Central Riverfront Master Plan, it would be really important to look at the existing facilities and the needs on places like Nicollet Island, and how to make those facilities meet the needs in a way that's gracious and serves everyone. So I think yes, and is the answer to the question. We can have a facility there that's better. We can have added facilities here. I hope that addresses your question. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and for your really thoughtful questions. We'll leave the image up here, and again, there are boards in the back. Folks will be back here to take your comments. We have post-its. You can do something. Thank you.